Imagine a moment so powerful that it changes the course of your life forever. A moment where anger, hate, and misunderstanding give way to curiosity, reflection, and ultimately transformation. This is the story of a man who, in an act of protest, set a sacred book on fire, only to find himself drawn back to it, not in defiance, but in search of truth. What happens when we confront our own misconceptions? What if the very thing we rejected holds the key to our awakening? Stay with me and let's explore a journey that defies expectations and sparks true change. In America, a man took to the streets with a message he felt strongly about. Holding the Quran in his hands, he stood before a crowd, cameras flashing, voices shouting, and he set the holy book on fire. To him, in that moment, it was not just paper and ink, it was a symbol of something he feared, something he misunderstood. The act wasn't just physical, it was deeply symbolic. Burning a religious book, especially one held sacred by over 1 billion people, is one of the most confrontational gestures one can make. It doesn't just challenge ideas, it wounds identity, culture, and faith. This protester wasn't just acting out of thin air. His beliefs were likely shaped by years of hearing negative narratives about Islam, absorbing fear-based messaging from certain media outlets or personal experiences that left him bitter. In his mind, this act of burning was a form of rebellion, a statement against what he thought the Quran represented. The flames in his eyes were a display of resistance, a message to others who felt the same. And yet, while the protest was loud and public, the deeper story was more silent, too. Acts like this often reveal less about the target and more about the individual carrying them out. His decision to burn the Quran suggested not only hostility, but also a desire to be seen, heard, and possibly understood, even if in the wrong way. It was an act of defiance rooted in confusion and emotion, not in knowledge. Instead of seeking answers or understanding, the protester chose to condemn what he hadn't yet explored. The symbolism was heavy, but the understanding behind it was hollow. The world saw a protest, but what was really happening inside this man was far more complex. The moment the protester set fire to the Quran, it was no longer just a local incident. It became a digital wildfire. Phones were already out, live streams rolling, and within minutes, the video was circulating across social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube lit up with clips, reactions, and debates. Hashtags formed. News outlets picked up the story. News outlets picked up the story. People weren't just watching, they were responding, analyzing, arguing, and reacting with intense emotion. The protester had lit a flame in the real world, but the digital world turned it into a global spotlight. For many, the video triggered deep anger and pain. Muslims around the world felt the insult personally, as though something sacred to them had been desecrated in front of millions. Protests erupted in other cities. Statements came from leaders, scholars, and influencers condemning the act. At the same time, some voices defended the protesters' right to free speech, sparking a parallel debate about the limits of expression and the responsibilities that come with it. This viral moment exposed the deep divide between freedom of speech and respect for religious values. It also showed how quickly misinformation can spread. In some posts, the Quran was misrepresented. In others, Islam itself was reduced to stereotypes. But in the flood of chaos, there were also thoughtful voices, people calling for understanding, urging viewers not to respond with more hate, but with education and empathy. What made this incident more than just another viral outrage was how personal it felt to so many people. The act had struck at something sacred, and the internet, being a reflection of society's raw nerves, exploded with emotion. The moment captured not just a man burning a book, but a culture clashing in real time, framed by pixels and broadcast to the world. After the protest died down and the crowd dispersed, the protester found himself sitting with a quiet he hadn't expected. The fire was out, but something else had sparked inside him. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was curiosity. A strange, persistent thought kept creeping into his mind. What exactly did I burn? It was a question he hadn't considered before. Until that moment, the Quran had been a symbol of something he rejected. Now, stripped of the noise, stripped of the anger, he began to wonder what it actually said. The curiosity didn't come with fanfare. It showed up in small, silent ways while he was alone, flipping through his phone or sitting in the car thinking about the reactions he saw online. Thousands of people had responded to his actions, but it was the calm, sincere ones that stayed with him. People weren't just angry. People weren't just angry. Some were asking questions. Some were inviting him to read, to learn, to look deeper. Those voices broke through the wall he had built around himself. He began searching online. First, just reading headlines, then articles, then parts of the Quran itself, translated, summarized, annotated. Every time he read a verse, it clashed with the image he had formed. The anger and violence he expected weren't jumping off the page. Instead, he found mentions of mercy, patience, and justice. It was confusing, and that confusion turned into a need to know more. He didn't tell anyone yet. It was too early, too raw, but in private, his walls were cracking. The book he had once tossed into flames was now in his search history. The very thing he tried to erase from the world was beginning to etch itself into his mind. What began as a protest was quietly transforming into a personal investigation. Eventually, curiosity led the protester to take a step he never imagined. He reached out to a local imam. It wasn't for a public debate or to challenge anyone to a fight of ideologies. It was private, cautious, almost hesitant. He sent a message, maybe an email, maybe a direct message on social media. The tone wasn't aggressive this time. It was inquisitive. He had questions and he wanted answers from someone who truly knew the book he had once set on fire. For the protester, this move took courage. Reaching out to someone from the very faith he had publicly disrespected was not easy. Pride and fear tugged at him. But the questions inside him had become too loud to ignore. He needed clarity. He needed to know if what he had read online was real, if the Quran was truly what its followers claimed it to be, a book of peace, guidance, and truth. The imam, a quiet figure in the local community, responded not with anger or bitterness, but with calm and openness. He didn't bring up the protest. He didn't accuse or scold. Instead, he welcomed the conversation. He invited the man to talk. No cameras, no audience, just two human beings sitting across from each other. The imam listened more than he spoke. He answered honestly without trying to convert or convince, just to explain. The protester asked about the verses he had read. He questioned the stories, the laws, the message, and for the first time, he wasn't looking for flaws, he was searching for understanding. The imam's patience and sincerity allowed the conversation to breathe, to grow. In that quiet setting, away from the noise of protests and social media, a dialogue began, one based not on conflict, but on curiosity. What unfolded between the protester and the imam wasn't a debate, it was a dialogue. There were no raised voices, no attempts to win an argument. The imam didn't come to defend Islam with forceful words, and the protester didn't arrive with a list of accusations. It was a conversation, human to human, built on honesty and respect. The imam listened carefully, answering each question without judgment. He didn't try to rush the man toward belief or shame him for his past. Instead, he offered clarity, context, and calmness. This approach disarmed the protester. He had expected defensiveness, maybe even anger, but what he found was something unexpected: peace, peace. And in that peaceful space, he let his guard down. He asked deeper questions, not just about the Quran, but about life, purpose, justice, and forgiveness. The imam didn't just quote scripture, he shared stories, personal reflections, and examples of how the teachings of Islam are lived daily. The protester began to realize this wasn't about converting him. It was about showing him the truth, one conversation at a time. Dialogue became a bridge, connecting two completely different worlds, not through force, but through mutual respect and the quiet power of sincerity. After his conversations with the imam, the protester did something he never thought he would. He picked up the Quran again, but this time it wasn't to burn it. It was to read it, not out of defiance or criticism, but with a desire to understand. The tone in his mind had shifted. The anger had quieted. Now he was reading with an open heart. He read slowly, thoughtfully. Some verses confused him, others challenged him, but many struck him deeply. Passages about justice, mercy, the oneness of God, and the importance of self-reflection began to resonate. He realized the Quran wasn't filled with the hatred he had been led to believe. Instead, it spoke directly to the soul about patience in hardship, kindness to others, and humility before the Creator. He stopped scanning for flaws and began searching for meaning. Certain lines stayed with him long after he closed the book. It wasn't just reading, it was reflection. It felt like the words were speaking to something deeper inside him, something he hadn't listened to in a long time. Each page challenged his old beliefs and made space for something new. His heart, once full of resistance, was beginning to soften. As he continued reading the Quran and speaking with the Imam, something began to stir inside the protester that went beyond simple curiosity. It was more than just learning facts or clarifying misunderstandings. He was experiencing a real shift, emotionally, intellectually, even spiritually. The words he read and the conversations he had were slowly breaking down the mental walls he had spent years building. The verses he once mocked were now making him think, and more than that, they were making him feel. He started seeing patterns in the teachings that aligned with values he already held: justice, compassion, truth, accountability. These weren't foreign ideas, they were just framed in a language and worldview he had never allowed himself to explore before. That realization was humbling. It challenged his pride. He had spoken loudly and publicly against a faith he had never truly taken the time to understand. And now, in private, that same faith was speaking to him in a voice that felt calm, clear, and honest. Emotionally, he felt torn. He was angry with himself for the assumptions he had made, but he also felt peace, something he couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore either. Intellectually, he was no longer in battle with the text. He was absorbing it. He was letting it confront him, not just in what he thought, but in how he lived. The shift didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. His questions didn't disappear. They deepened, but now they came from a place of openness, not opposition. For the first time, he wasn't just reading the Quran, he was letting it read him. And as it did, something in him began to change. Not just how he saw Islam, but how he saw himself. As the days passed, the protester found himself drawn more and more to the Quran, not just for answers, but for peace. What began as reading became reflection, and what started as curiosity turned into connection. The words were no longer just text on a page. They began to feel like guidance, like they were written specifically for the questions stirring inside him. He felt something shifting deep within, a sense of awakening he couldn't explain logically, but couldn't deny either. He noticed how his thoughts were changing. He became more mindful, more aware of his actions, more in tune with the idea of purpose. He started praying, not formally at first, but simply talking to God in his own words, seeking clarity. He felt lighter, more at ease, even though nothing around him had changed. It was what was happening inside that felt new. Conversations with the Imam continued, each one deepening his understanding and pulling him closer to something that felt whole and truthful. The spiritual pull he once resisted had now become a source of comfort. Islam, once the object of his protest, had become the light guiding him toward something bigger than himself, toward God, toward peace, toward truth. After weeks of reading, reflection, and heartfelt conversations, Protester made a quiet but powerful decision. He embraced Islam. There was no grand stage, no cameras, just a sincere moment between him, the Imam, and God. He spoke the Shahada, the declaration of faith, with a trembling voice and a heart full of certainty. The journey that began in anger had led to submission, not to people, but to truth. His identity shifted, not because someone forced him, but because he found something real. In that moment, the protester became a believer, reborn through understanding and guided by faith. This story reveals the profound power of truth and patience over hostility and ignorance. The protester's journey was one of transformation, and it highlights how powerful it can be to approach people with understanding rather than aggression. The Imam, through patience and openness, never pressured him but allowed him to explore the truth on his own terms. The protester didn't just learn about Islam, he discovered the truth within himself, a truth that had been clouded by anger and misconceptions. The real power wasn't in forcing beliefs or winning arguments, it was in the patient unfolding of understanding. The Imam didn't react with anger despite the burning of the Quran, but instead responded with calm and a willingness to engage. The protesters' eventual conversion wasn't born from pressure, but from genuine curiosity and a search for meaning. The story emphasizes how, with patience and the right approach, understanding and truth can overcome even the deepest prejudices. In the end, this story reminds us that change doesn't come through force, but through understanding, patience, and the pursuit of truth. The protester's journey from anger to faith shows how powerful it can be when we choose dialogue over debate and curiosity over judgment. It's a testament to the idea that even in the most difficult situations, hearts and minds can be transformed if we approach each other with respect and an open heart. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on this powerful story. I wish you the best in your own journey. May it be filled with understanding, peace, and growth. Good luck. Emotionally, he felt torn. He was angry with himself for the assumptions he had made, but he also felt peace, something he couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore either. Intellectually, he was no longer in battle with the text. He was absorbing it. He was letting it confront him, not just in what he thought, but in how he lived. The shift didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like dawn, breaking after a long night. His questions didn't disappear, they deepened, but now they came from a place of openness, not opposition. For the first time, he wasn't just reading the Quran, he was letting it read him. And as it did, something in him began to change. Not just how he saw Islam, but how he saw himself. As the days passed, the protester found himself drawn more and more to the Quran, not just for answers, but for peace. What began as reading became reflection, and what started as curiosity turned into connection. The words were no longer just text on a page. They began to feel like guidance, like they were written specifically for the questions stirring inside him. He felt something shifting deep within, a sense of awakening he couldn't explain logically, but couldn't deny either. He noticed how his thoughts were changing. He became more mindful, more aware of his actions, more in tune with the idea of purpose. He started praying, not formally at first, but simply talking to God in his own words, seeking clarity. He felt lighter, more at ease, even though nothing around him had changed. It was what was happening inside that felt new. Conversations with the Imam continued, each one deepening his understanding and pulling him closer to something that felt whole and truthful. The spiritual pull he once resisted had now become a source of comfort. Islam, once the object of his protest, had become the light guiding him toward something bigger than himself, toward God, toward peace, toward truth. After weeks of reading, reflection, and heartfelt conversations, the protester made a quiet but powerful decision. He embraced Islam. There was no grand stage, no cameras, just a sincere moment between him, the Imam, and God. He spoke the Shahada, the declaration of faith, with a trembling voice and a heart full of certainty. The journey that began in anger had led to submission, not to people, but to truth. His identity shifted, not because someone forced him, but because he found something real. In that moment, the protester became a believer, reborn through understanding and guided by faith.